Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, I want to talk to you about essay writing. Now, writing essays is an art form. There are no hard and fast rules. Nevertheless, I think there's some general rules that apply in almost all cases. The advice I'm going to give you here is my advice. This is my sense of what makes a good, effective essay, and it's based on a lot of years of reading and marking a lot of essays. It's important to recognize that every course is different, every professor is different, so you should always direct specific questions about assignments to the professor for the course you're taking. In this video, I'm going to focus on three big things. First, I'm going to talk about structure. Then I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about introductions. And lastly, I'm going to talk about evidence. Let's begin with structure. There are many different ways to structure an essay. That might surprise you because maybe you've had teachers who tell you there is one way to write an essay. Every essay must follow this format or this form. That's not exactly true. You've probably heard of the hamburger essay. This is a pretty basic structure for an essay. You've got your introduction and your conclusion, which are kind of like the buns of the hamburger, and then your body paragraphs are kind of like the toppings. This is a perfectly fine way to structure an essay. In fact, it can be really useful. But sometimes students think their essay has to have 3 body paragraphs. That's not true. What if you have 4 points to make, or even 6 points to make? That's totally fine. You can have as many body paragraphs as you want, however many are necessary to fit your argument. The most important thing is that the essay has to have a clear structure. You want an introduction that includes a clear thesis claim, and then you want the body paragraphs of your essay to supply evidence that supports your thesis. You want your argument to flow smoothly and methodically from one point to the next. It just needs to make sense. Okay, let's talk about introductions. Introductions are really hard because it's always hard to know where to begin. Where do we start? A lot of students have heard of the funnel method. That's where you start really broad and then you get gradually more specific in your introduction. Forget the funnel. I hate the funnel. Hate it. Especially in a short essay, you want to get to the point right away. You don't want to start with some broad, overly general statement about history or humanity. In a 5-page paper, you don't have space to talk about all of human history. Here's a good training wheels exercise that I like to give my students when they first start writing essays. Mention the work under investigation in your first sentence. This has the effect of focusing in your argument right away on the text under discussion. So for example, you might begin with a sentence like, William Shakespeare's Hamlet explores the relationship between fate and free will. So mention the text under investigation in your first sentence. It's a good trick. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's a way of training yourself to narrow your focus. Okay, now your introduction should also include a thesis statement. Your thesis should be an argument. In an essay, your thesis claim will often be interpretive or critical. One trick to test whether or not you've got a good thesis is to ask yourself, could someone disagree with this claim? If they can disagree with the claim you're making, that's good because it means you're making an argument. You're not just making a kind of broad, wishy-washy statement. You're taking a side. Let's look at this thesis claim as an example. Hamlet embraces theatricality as a means of coping with the inevitability of death. Shakespeare's tragedy thus suggests that art is the only sensible response to the problem of human mortality. Let's look at the first part. Hamlet embraces theatricality as a means of coping with the inevitability of death. This is a promising kind of thesis claim because someone could disagree with this. Maybe Hamlet embraces theatricality for a different reason. Now let's look at the second part. Shakespeare's tragedy thus suggests that art is the only sensible response to the problem of human mortality. Again, this is provocative. You're saying something. Well, maybe that's not what Shakespeare's tragedy suggests. Maybe I want to disagree with that. The fact that someone can disagree with these claims suggests that they're argumentative. They're saying something, and that's good. Here's a bonus tip. Don't worry too much about your introduction at the very beginning. You might not even know what you're writing about until you write a rough draft of the paper. So whatever you say in your introduction at first, you can come back and fix it later. In fact, you really should. Editing is the most important part of the writing process. Last thing we need to talk about is evidence. So the reason we professors assign essays is because we want you to learn to argue using evidence. We want you to learn to critically analyze problems, to evaluate arguments, and to make persuasive arguments of your own using evidence. So what counts as evidence? Well, that varies by discipline. But generally speaking, if you're writing an essay on a book, on a thinker or an author, then what you're looking for is textual evidence. You want to ground your argument in the text. Your interpretation, your analysis needs to be supported by what's going on in the text. And then you want to find passages from the text that support your interpretation. Specific references to arguments, claims, images, lines. That's what we're looking for. Learning to write essays well is a crucial skill for success at university, so you really want to master it. And learning how to make evidence-based arguments, how to write clearly and effectively those are skills that are going to stay with you for the rest of your life. So work hard on your essays, enjoy them, hone your craft, become great writers. That's all for me. Thanks, everybody.